Have you ever stopped to think, what happens after death? What if Jesus showed you the future of the church and a secret that the Vatican hid from the world? In today's story, you will meet Michael Turner, a man who died and came back with a shocking revelation, the last pope and the end of the church as we know it. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment here which city you are watching from, because this message needs to be heard before it is too late. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 52 years old, from Texas. Or at least, era. The last thing I remember was falling to the floor of my office with an unbearable pain in my chest. A heart attack, they later said. But at that moment, I knew something terrible was happening. And then, silence. Absolute emptiness. I thought it was over. But it's not over. Suddenly, I found myself outside of my body. I looked down and saw the paramedics trying to revive me. I was dead. I knew it. And before I could even process it, I felt a force pulling me. It wasn't a soft light, no, it was like being sucked into something immense, bigger than anything my mind could comprehend. When I stopped, I was in a place I can't quite describe. It was a kind of courtroom. An endless room with golden columns that seemed made of light and shadow at the same time. And in the center, a presence. I can't say I saw a face, but I felt an awareness that passed through me. It knew everything about me. And then, a voice. I didn't hear it with my ears. I felt it. It said, "You will be witness to something that men have hidden for decades." At that moment, a wall in front of me opened up, and I saw a library. No ordinary library. Every book, every scroll seemed made of light, and each one carried a piece of truth about the world and about us. An entity, I don't know if it was an angel or a messenger, approached. His gaze was at once one of compassion and sadness. He led me to a pedestal where there was an envelope, sealed, with a seal that I recognized immediately even though I had never seen it before. It was the coat of arms of the Vatican. The world never knew. They hid it. And now you will see. The seal broke, and inside, a scroll. And the words, my God, the words burned into my mind like pure fire. When Rome loses its faith, the world will lose its soul. The throne will be occupied not by a shepherd, but by one who will dress like a lamb and speak like a dragon. And when this happens, the altar will become a stage. The incense will become smoke and the sacrifice will be empty. And at that time, the Pope will cease to be the one who holds the keys and will become the one who gives them away. The messenger stared at me. The third secret was not about wars. It was not about nations. It was always about Rome. It was always about the day when the heart of the church would be invaded not by armies but by lies disguised as truth. Then I saw a vision so vivid that it brought me to my knees, even without a physical body. A man dressed in white. He was walking among the rubble of a cathedral. Behind him, broken statues, shattered stained glass windows, destroyed altars, and thousands of bodies. Not of sinners, but of the faithful. Priests, nuns, bishops, all fallen. And the voice repeated, "It will be the last, not because it will end, but because what comes after will no longer be church." My ethereal body trembled. I wanted to scream, to run, to deny it, but there was no way. It was true, and the next scene made me lose all hope. A calendar marking the year 2025, and a bell that rang, not in celebration, but in mourning. The messenger then took my hand and said, "You will come back, you will tell. They still have time, but very little." And in that instant, I was thrown back. My chest burned, my eyes flew open, and I was back, but nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same. When I woke up in the hospital, my head felt like it was exploding, but not from pain, from overload. It was like my mind, my spirit, my entire being was trying to process something impossible, something no human being should have seen. The image of that man, of that Pope, walking among the rubble, would not leave my mind. It was as if it were burned into my soul. But there was more, because after that initial vision I was taken to another place. It was no longer that golden room, it was no longer the library of secrets. It was a space, dark, dense, as if it were made of smoke, and in the center an empty throne. But the throne was cracked, broken at the edges as if something had eaten away at it from the inside. The messenger was standing beside me, and he said, "This is Peter's throne, and look what they have done to it." In front of the throne, figures began to form, silhouettes, bishops, cardinals, faces I didn't recognize but whose expressions were of arrogance, pride, and something worse. Their mouths moved, but I heard no words, only shapeless sounds, as if they were speaking half-truths mixed with lies. And then the messenger explained to me, "They preach mercy, Sarah, without repentance. They preach inclusion, without conversion. They talk of love, without truth. And so, they confuse, invert, distort, until wrong seems right, and right seems cruel." At that moment I saw black smoke rising from the base of the cracked throne. It rose and began to spread like tentacles. Each tentacle clung to churches, altars, seminaries, and faces. Faces of priests, of leaders, and even of the common faithful. The smoke entered their eyes, their ears, and when it did, their mouths smiled, but their eyes were dead, empty. The messenger touched me on the shoulder and said something that still gives me chills to this day. This, they call it diabolical disorientation, the final reversal, when Rome ceases to be a beacon and becomes a mirror of the world, when the one who should guide will be the one who leads to the abyss. And once again the year appeared before me, 2025, and this time accompanied by a sound, the sound of a door closing. At that moment a new vision appeared, an altar, but there was no sacrifice, there was no Eucharist, just a stage, microphones, lights, and a man dressed in white, smiling. His words, sweet, soft, but within them, poison. Each phrase seemed like a caress, but it was a blade. "And when this happen," said the messenger, "the stones will cry out, for the sky will not be silent." That was when I saw an invisible hand holding a scale. On one side, Rome. On the other, the entire world. And the scale was tilted, dangerously tilted. The messenger turned to me with an expression I will never forget. "When Rome falls, the world will fall behind." And then, again, the sound of that bell, mournful, ringing, 3 times, and a voice that seemed to come from heaven itself. "The time for warnings is over." In that moment, I understood. I wasn't there to be comforted. I was there to bear witness, to carry back a message the world refused to hear. The scenery changed again. The smoke disappeared, and for a moment I thought it was over. But it wasn't. I was taken to a place that to this day I have trouble describing without trembling inside. It was a city, but not just any city. I knew, instinctively, that this place represented Rome, but not the Rome we know. It was a spiritual Rome, a metaphysical version reflecting not its physical buildings but its spiritual condition. And what I saw destroyed me. Cathedral cracked, the facade still standing but inside, empty. The lights on, but no real presence. Altars without a tabernacle, crucifixes covered by veils, and in the center, St. Peter's Square. But the square was full of people kneeling, not in prayer, but in despair. They looked up, searching for something, waiting for something, and they couldn't find it, because the sky was closed. And there, in the middle of the square, he, the Pope, the same man from the previous vision, dressed in white, but his expression was not one of peace, it was of agony. He held in his hands the keys of Peter, but they were broken. Broken. One cracked in half, the other melting in his hands like wax. I watched as he looked up at the sky, raised his hands, and screamed. But no sound came out, not a word. And the silence that followed was worse than any scream, because it was the silence of abandonment, the silence of someone who realizes that something or someone has withdrawn. Behind him, shadows began to appear, silhouettes of men, faces hidden, but their hands held documents, laws, decrees. Each paper they lifted seemed to extinguish a part of the remaining light in the city. And then I realized, each document was a new distortion of the truth, a new false doctrine, a new step away from the faith. The messenger appeared again at my side. His face was pure sadness. When shepherds become merchants, and when the altar becomes a stage, the house of God becomes a ruin. And at that moment, the shadows pointed at the Pope, and they began to pull him, first by the shoulders, then by the arms, and then by the legs. And he resisted. Yes, he tried to resist. He tried to hold on to the key. He tried to steady himself on the ground, but it was as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. And then, a huge crack opened in the square, like a spiritual earthquake, and from it rose black smoke, thick, and from it, voices came, voices, distorted, and they all said the same thing, peace, unity, love, but they sounded false, because there was no truth in them, there was no cross, there was no repentance, just accommodation, just surrender. The messenger, with a look that seemed to contain millennia of pain, spoke. The third secret was not just a warning, it was a sentence, and it was ignored. And once again the calendar appeared, 2025, but now, with a terrible detail. The following pages were blank, simply blank, as if, from then on, there was nothing more written, as if whatever came next was no longer recorded, as if the future had been left to the choices or mistakes of men. I looked at the messenger, desperate, and I asked, "What will happen?" And his answer was the simplest and the most terrifying. Whatever they choose. After that last sentence, whatever they choose, I thought it would all end there. That I would be taken back, wake up in the hospital, and it would all just be a delirium, a nightmare, something. But no, because at that moment the messenger reached out his hand toward me, and when he touched my forehead, everything around me just disappeared. What came next was a kind of step back in time. I didn't see time passing or dates. I saw facts, moments, as if I were walking through the backstage of history, not the history in the books, but the real one, the one that had always been hidden. And then I stopped in a room, small, dark, men sitting around a table, no cross, no signs of faith, just strange symbols engraved on the walls, symbols that I dare not describe here because just thinking about them makes my body freeze. These men were not enemies of the church on the outside. They were men on the inside. Some wore cassocks, others wore plain clothes. But all held in their hands documents, contracts, pacts, oaths. But they did not swear allegiance to Christ or to the church. They swore an allegiance to something much older and much darker. The messenger whispered in my ear. This is where it all began. They opened the door, and what came in never came out again. I saw one of the men lift a book, a heavy black book. He placed it on the table and said, in a voice that seemed to reverberate beyond the room, "The plan is simple: infiltrate, distort, confuse, and dominate. The house will not be torn down from the outside. It will be emptied inside. Brick by brick, doctrine for doctrines, here until only the shell remains." And then others started listing the steps. I documented them mentally because, my God, it felt like a script written by hell itself. First, relativize the truth. Then, discredit the dogmas. Next, attack the priesthood, soil their garments, defile their altars. And finally, to place on the throne someone who smiled, but who inside and was empty of faith, who spoke of love but never of the cross, who preached mercy, but forgot the truth. The messenger then pointed to one of the men at the table, and when I looked, my heart almost stopped, because that face was familiar, well known. A man revered, quoted, loved, someone who, in the official history, was treated as a hero of the faith. But here he was, among those who engineered the downfall. I tried to deny it. I tried to say it can't be, but the messenger answered, looking straight into my eyes. Not all traitors wear masks. Some wear mitres. It was at that moment that I saw a map being spread out on the table. But it was not a geographical map. It was a spiritual map, lines and circles that connected specific points in the world, and they all led to Rome. In the center, a word written in Latin, which I will never forget: smoke of Satan. The smoke of Satan, and beneath it, a date, 1960. The messenger pointed. When they chose silence, they chose the path of no return. And then, one last scene was shown to me. An envelope, the same envelope I had seen in the heavenly library. But now, in the hands of a man inside the Vatican, he looks, reads, turns pale, and then locks the document in a drawer, turns the key, and throws the key into the fire. At that moment, the entire sky seemed to tremble, because what should have been a warning had become a secret. What was supposed to save had become condemnation, and what was sealed would now be exacted. The messenger held my arm tightly. And that's why you're here, because the clock isn't telling hours anymore, it's telling seconds. And then, once again, that vision, the calendar, 2025, and this time with a sound that will never leave my mind. The sound of glass breaking. After that last vision of the map of Satan's smoke of the envelope being burned, I thought it couldn't get any worse. I was wrong, very wrong. The messenger grabbed my shoulder, looked into my eyes, and said, "Now, you will see what happens when the lamp goes out." In that instant, everything around me fell apart, as if I had been pulled into a whirlwind of smoke. I was thrown upward or outward. I couldn't tell. And then, I found myself looking at the world. Yes, the whole world, but not as we are accustomed to seeing it. It was as if I were seeing the world through the eyes of God. And what I saw took my breath away. The earth was covered, but not with light, not with glory. It was covered with a dark web, a spiritual net spreading over nations, cities, continents, a kind of mist, alive, pulsing, and each pulse seemed to suck something in, as if draining life, hope, faith. And then I realized that this mist was directly linked to that crack I had seen open in St. Peter's Square, as if, when that spiritual door opened, what escaped was not confined to the church. It spread throughout the entire world. The messenger spoke in the deepest voice I have ever heard. When the light on the altar goes out, the light of the world goes out with it. Because what sustains the world is not governments, is not armies, is not economies. It is intercession, it is sacrifice, it is true worship, and when it ceases, the world collapses spiritually. And in that instant, I began to see scenes from a future that seemed impossible, but that at that moment was frighteningly real. I saw churches being transformed into spiritual entertainment centers, pastors, priests, and leaders more concerned with applause than with salvation. I saw altars being dismantled, crosses being removed, and in their place, slogans. Phrases like, "All is love, all is permitted, there is no more sin." I saw families falling apart, children who no longer recognized their parents, parents who abandoned their children, homes that stopped being sanctuaries and became invisible battlefields. I saw nations in moral collapse, laws being passed that completely tore apart the natural order created by God. And every time such a law was signed, a part of the light of the earth went out. And then I saw wars, not conventional wars, but invisible wars, information wars, spiritual wars, lies becoming truths, and truths being treated as crimes, and those who dared to speak the truth were silenced, canceled, persecuted. And in the center of it all, I saw again the Pope, that man dressed in white. But now, he was on his knees, weeping. His robes were torn. He held in his hands a broken chalice, and the two halves of the key useless, and he screamed. But again, no sound came out. And then, the sky shook, literally shook, and a voice that was no longer that of the messenger, nor that of an angel, but seemed to be that of God himself, echoed throughout the universe. When Rome fails, the world fails. When the altar is desecrated, the world becomes a field of condemnation. When truth is negotiated, mercy withdraws, and when men choose silence, I choose justice. And at that moment, I saw an angel, a giant, with a flaming sword. He was standing over the planet watching, waiting, and the messenger beside me spoke. "This is the angel of the threshold. He has only one function. When the last warning is ignored, he will bring no more words. He will bring separation." And once again, that terrible sight, the calendar, 2025. But now, it was no longer blank. In fact, the following pages were stained, as if someone had spilled blood on them. And then, I heard it. The sound I will never forget. It wasn't a bell, it wasn't an explosion, it was the sound of a door locking, but not from the outside, from the inside. After that sound, the sound of the door locking from the inside, my whole soul screamed. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to run away. I wanted to disappear from there. But no, it wasn't the end yet. The messenger looked at me, and for the first time, his eyes weren't just sadness, there was urgency. There was fire in them, and he said, "It's not over yet. There's still one last chance." Everything around me changed once more. The smoke, the ruins, the scales, all disappeared, and I found myself standing before a woman. But this was no ordinary woman. She was clothed in light. white robes that seemed made of the very essence of heaven, and upon her chest a heart, not of flesh but a heart, surrounded by thorns and on fire. I fell to my knees. I didn't need to ask who it was. My spirit knew it was her, the woman of the apocalypse, the Lady of Fatima, the Mother of God. And her voice, my God, her voice wasn't just sound. It was like music and pain at the same time. And she spoke. They did not listen when I asked. They did not listen when I pleaded. They did not listen when I cried. And then tears streamed from her eyes, but they were no ordinary tears. They were like little drops of light that when they fell to the ground made roses bloom. Roses made of fire and light, but these roses withered as soon as they touched the ground. She pointed to the planet below us, and I saw it. Little points of light, some very bright, others faint, others almost fading. And she explained, "These are those who still pray, those who still believe, those who still fight, but they are so few, and the darkness is crushing them, because the shepherds have abandoned the altars, because the guardians have opened the gates, because Rome has exchanged incense for smoke." And then the scene changed again. I saw a hand, a divine hand, holding two objects. One, a rosary, the other, a heart on fire, and her voice said, "There is still time, but little. They must consecrate themselves. They must take up the weapons that heaven has offered. The rosary and my heart. This is the last refuge. This is the last call." At that moment, a revelation struck me like a bolt of lightning. I understood that what was happening was not just about the church. It was not just about the Pope. It was about each and every one of us. It was about me. It was about you. It was about everyone who, in some way, still breathes in this world. And then I saw a door, a single door, made of light. It was ajar, but on the other side, darkness was already advancing, and the lady spoke. "When this door closes, there will be no other." And once again, that scene, the calendar, 2025. But now, the door was beginning to close, slowly, every second, a small movement, as if time was literally running out. I looked at her desperate and asked, "What should I do? What should we do?" And your answer disarmed me. Do what I have always asked, but that almost no one believed. Consecration, prayer, penance, and never, never abandon the rosary. Because when everything falls apart, when even the altars are torn down, when there is no stone left standing, whoever holds these beads, whoever is hidden in my heart, will be invisible in the darkness. And then, the most disturbing sight of all, I saw people holding rosaries, and all around them, absolute darkness. But this darkness could not touch them. The darkness advanced, tried, screamed, but it was as if an invisible barrier protected them, while everyone else, Juan, who had nothing, were simply swallowed up. The messenger returned. He touched my shoulder, and in a firm voice, he declared, "The last pope is standing, but not for long. The decision is no longer his, it is heaven's, and every living soul in this world's." And then, once again, that sound. The door closing, only now, much, much faster. The door of light was closing, and I could feel it on. The sound of it knocking wasn't just physical, It was spiritual. It was as if each knock was a sentence, a decree that echoed through the heavens, the earth, and even hell. The messenger gripped my arm so tightly it felt like my entire spirit would shatter, and without warning we were pulled back, thrown to earth. But not the earth I knew. No, this was post-collapse. The first thing I saw was silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that it seemed as if even sound had died. And then I looked at Rome, or rather, what was left of it. St. Peter's Square was in ruins. The dome of the basilica collapsed. The pillars broken. The obelisk toppled. And in the center, an altar, but no longer an altar of sacrifice. It was a stone, cold, burnt, without a cross, without light, without life. I walked, or floated, I can't tell, but I got closer, and there, lying on the ground, he was, the Pope, that man. His robes torn, his hands holding nothing, because the keys were gone. The fisherman's ring, broken, and his mouth, open in a scream, frozen in time. But there was no more sound, not even for him. And that's when I realized, the calendar, 2025. But there were no more pages. It was the last one, and below it, a sentence, written, not in ink, but in spiritual blood. The time of mercy is over. I looked around, and then I saw that Rome was not alone. The collapse was global. I saw churches closed, doors locked, others converted into self-help centers, clubs, theaters. I saw people wandering the streets like spiritual zombies, their eyes completely opaque, as if they had been disconnected from their own soul. And then, a terrible scene. I saw angels, yes, angels, but not the kind of soft iconography with white feathered wings, no. These were like warriors of incandescent light, bearing swords and sundering. Yes, separating. On one side, those who held rosaries, those who had hidden themselves in the Immaculate Heart. On the other, all those who mocked, those who ignored, those who chose the comforts of the world instead of the cross. And the separation was not symbolic, it was real. I saw families being torn apart, wives being taken while husbands stayed behind, fathers holding their children, and the children simply disappearing from their sight because they didn't choose, because they ignored it. And then the sky closed, as if an invisible curtain had been pulled back, and outside, light. Inside, darkness. And the darkness began to feed on everything. I saw entire cities, sinking spiritually, not physically, but it was as if their foundations, their spiritual structure, had been ripped away. No roots, no ground. And then, the final collapse. The messenger beside me didn't say a word. He just stared, with tears in his eyes. Tears that didn't fall to the ground because there was no ground anymore. The world was suspended between two destinies. And now, the door was locked. And a voice that seemed to come from every corner of the universe echoed for the last time. When Rome fell, the world fell behind. The Pope, the last Pope, was no longer standing. Not because he died, but because his mission was over, because that which he was supposed to hold could no longer be held. And then, a light, small, very small, but real. In the middle of it all, a group, tiny, of people, kneeling, holding rosaries, holding hands, crying, but holding firm, and around them, a bubble of light that the darkness could not penetrate. And then the messenger spoke. For the last time, your world has been given to those who chose it. After hearing that last sentence, the world has been given to those who chose it, I thought it was all over. But it wasn't, because in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of destruction, something unexpected started to happen. That little bubble of light where those who held their rosaries, their candles, their tears, began to pulse. Weakly at first, but soon, so intense that it seemed to defy the very emptiness that surrounded them. And then, I heard a sound, for the first time after so much silence. A sound. Faint, but powerful. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a lament. It was Modi prayer. They prayed. They prayed with a strength I have never seen in my life. They did not pray to save themselves. They prayed for others. They prayed for humanity that chose collapse. They prayed for those who could no longer pray. The messenger looked at me, and now, his face was no longer one of sadness. It was one of reverence. Here is what they never understood. The world is not held up by the powerful. It is not held up by those who speak from golden pulpits. It is not held up by those who govern. The world has always been held up by the bended knees of the invisible. And in that instant, something indescribable happened. I saw the sky open. No, not like before. Not like a physical opening. It was as if a spiritual portal formed directly over that small group. And from the portal descended something I cannot put into words. It was light, but not ordinary light. It was pure glory. It was presence. And with that presence descended an army. Yes, an army. But not angels as we imagine. They were beings of light, beings who carried in one hand flaming swords, and in the other, rosaries. Rosaries, made of fire and gold, and they surrounded that group. And when they did so, the darkness simply retreated, not because it wanted to, but because it couldn't stay. And then I saw the whole world from above. And I realized that scattered, there were more of these groups, small, almost invisible, but there they were, in the fields, in the mountains, in basements, in small hidden chapels, in poor apartments, in forgotten convents, all protected and by the same bubble of light. The messenger then declared, "Here is the rest. Here is the remnant, that which heaven has always preserved, that which hell has never been able to corrupt." And in that moment, a scene that will never leave my mind, I saw a tree, a single tree, in the middle of the desert that the world had become, and from that tree grew fruit, golden fruit, fruit of glory, and each fruit was a soul that chose to stand. Then the lady's voice returned. I did not see it, but I heard it, as if it came from within creation itself. They will be the beginning after the end. They will be the root after the tree is cut down. They are the light after the night. And in that moment, something shocking happened. I saw the darkness retreat, not because it had been vanquished, but because what it could consume had already been consumed. What remained was untouchable. The messenger stared at me, and his voice now was different. There was no more regret, only certainty. They will survive, not because they are strong, not because there are many of them, but because they are faithful, and from their midst will arise, what no one expects. And then, a cross. Huge. Immense. It appeared, floating, above that small town, and from the cross, descended, a light that, for the first time since the beginning of that vision, was not just light, it was hope. And in that moment, I understood that, even when everything falls apart, even when everything seems lost, God never abandons those who do not abandon Him. The calendar was still there, 2025, but now something had changed. For the first time, a new page appeared. White, unstained, unbloodied, uncracked, and in the center of it, a single word, written in gold. Start. What happened next seemed impossible. It seemed beyond any human understanding, and yet, I was there. I saw it. After that last written word, start, I realized that the world, despite being shattered, had not been destroyed. At least, not completely. I saw the darkness retreat, not because it had been defeated in battle, but because it had no place left to dwell. All that was rotten, all that was corrupt, all that had chosen lies, had been consumed. All that remained was true. All that was pure. All that had not been sold. And then, I saw something extraordinary. I saw that small people, that faithful remnant, begin to move, stepping out of the bubbles of light, walking, slowly, but with their eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since this vision began. Hope. There were no more majestic temples. There were no more monumental basilicas. There were no more ecclesiastical palaces. All of that had fallen. Everything that was structure, that was appearance, that was facade, had been torn away by the spiritual storm. But, amidst the rubble, they began to erect something. Not buildings, not institutions, but altars, small altars, simple ones, made of stone, of wood, some just a cloth on a rock. And on these altars, they placed not gold, not incense, but what they had, their own hearts, their own lives. And then it happened, the impossible. I saw priests, not many, but some, who had remained faithful, and who now emerged from the hiding places, from the catacombs, from the spiritual caverns where they had taken refuge, and they began to offer the sacrifice, the Holy Mass, not in cathedrals, but in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the ruins. And every time the altar was raised and a light went up, a column of light that went straight to heaven, and I realized that this light was accepted. It was received, as if God was saying, "Now yes, now you understand." The messenger beside me was on his knees. Yes, the messenger himself knelt, and his voice was now one of absolute reverence. What was torn away was what should never have been built. What remained is what was always eternal. And then, a shocking scene. I saw a child, a single child, stand up in the midst of those people. She held a small crucifix in her hand, and when she raised the crucifix, something extraordinary happened. A tree began to sprout from the ground, fast, strong, powerful, and in a few seconds, it was an enormous tree, full of leaves, full of life, and from it began to grow fruits of light. And the lady appeared again, only now her heart was no longer surrounded by thorns. Now her heart was crowned with flowers, and she spoke. What has fallen has fallen. What has been plucked has gone. But what is mine will never be touched. And out of the small, I will make the great. Out of the despised, I will make the cornerstone. And then, a searing revelation. I understood that the church was never the building. It was never the power. It was never the throne. The church was, is, and always will be the altar, the chalice, the cross, and the bended knees of those who do not compromise on faith. The Pope. The last Pope was no longer there, because his mission was over, because what he was supposed to hold could no longer be held. The papacy, as we knew it, had been ended, not destroyed, but transformed, because now those people no longer needed palaces, no longer needed crowns. They had returned to the essence, to the beginning, to purity. And the calendar, now, had no more dates, just a single word, written in living gold. The new church, the new church. Everything began to fade away. The lights, the trees, the new church rising amidst the ruins, the lady, the messenger. Everything seemed to dissolve like mist touched by the wind. But the only thing that did not disappear was the sound of those prayers, of those weak but unbreakable voices, echoing in what was left of the universe. Suddenly I felt a tug, strong, brutal, as if my spirit was being ripped from that place. I felt my body, or what was left of it, being thrown backwards, inwards, downwards. It was an impact. And then my eyes opened. I was back. In the hospital, monitors beeping, doctors screaming, my wife crying in the corner of my room. I was alive. But I knew with every cell, every atom of my being, that I was no longer the same. Because what I saw, what I heard, was not a dream. It was not a delusion. It was a commission. It was a calling. A mission that cannot and must not be ignored. The doctors said I was dead for 4 minutes, only 4 minutes. But on the other side, I looked like I had lived 1,000 years. And since that day, a phrase has not left my head. The phrase that echoed until the end of that experience: don't wait for Rome. Yes, because our Roman will not save you. The Pope will not save you. The institution will not save you. If there is one thing that has become absolutely clear to me, it is that the time of structures is over. The time of appearances is over. Now, it is each soul, before God, each family, before heaven, each person deciding whether or not to hold the weapons that have been given to us. And what are these weapons? I saw it, I know it, I will never forget it. They are just two, simple, humble, and at the same time, more powerful than any bomb, any army, any government, any empire. Their names are the Rosary and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. When everything falls, when everything crumbles, when even the altars themselves are torn down, whoever holds these two weapons, whoever takes refuge in this heart, will not be touched, will not be swallowed up, because even if the body perishes, the soul will be sealed. And I know that many will doubt, that many will laugh, that many will say that this is superstition, fanaticism, madness. But believe me, nothing you think about security, future, stability, is real. Nothing. The only real thing is this invisible war that has already begun, and you are already in it, whether you like it or not. The last Pope has fulfilled his role. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't know if he'll see 2025. I don't know if I'll see it myself. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because what I've learned is that this war is not about leaders. It's not about public figures. It's about every soul. It's about me. It's about you. And the question that echoed until the last second was, which side will you be on when the door closes? I don't know how much longer I can tell this. I don't know if they'll try to silence me. I don't know if this message will ever reach the people it needs to reach. But if you're listening and it's no accident, you were chosen, you were warned, and now you must choose. Because the time for warnings is over. The time for alerts is over. Now it's just a matter of decision. Because on the other side, they've already started to close the door. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.